Hello, and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the podcast that gives you everything you need to know about the day ahead on the election trail.
My name is Sam Coates of Sky News, and with me is Jack Blanchard of Politico. And it's Monday morning, it's day 19 of the election campaign, and there are 24 days until polling day.
And it's manifesto week, Sam. We've been looking forward to this one for a while. Pretty much all the main parties are putting out their manifestos this week. So we'll be going through that. It's been a torrid few days for Rishi Sunak, as we know, but he'll be trying to reset his campaign today as he resurfaces for his first interviews since you spoke to him, Sam, on Friday. Just tell us about that. I think pretty much everyone has watched that interview now on Twitter or whatever we call it. What on earth was that like?
Well, that was off the back of his decision to leave early from the D-Day commemorations. And there was just a lot of anger directed at him from veterans, from his party. And in a sort of pool interview, which means that I'm out of shot asking questions on behalf of all the broadcasters, I sort of channeled some of that anger and put it to him fairly punctually. And it was very, very tense. Everybody kind of walked off in silence afterwards. Anyway, let's see whether he's the right way up today. What are the big three things today, Jack?
Well, the big three things in the UK are very much Rishi Sunak coming out to try and calm these Tory nerves. He's got a big thing this morning and then a big interview this afternoon. Can he get his party back on track? And it's a big day for Ed Davey too, the Lib Dem leader. He's launching their manifesto. Presumably they've got some big stunt for us all to look forward to. For the Labour Party, they're rolling out their childcare plans today, which is obviously a very totemic policy for them. So we'll get into that as well. And of course, Sam, we'll have to talk about the European Parliament elections, albeit briefly last night, given the seismic shock that they've created across Europe and that early election that Emmanuel Macron has called in France. So an awful lot going on, but let's start with our own Prime Minister, Sam, because he's had a pretty bleak few days. You know, this was an election campaign that had to go absolutely perfectly for Rishi Sunak, given where he started. And it's pretty fair to say it's done anything but that, from the drowned rat pictures of the start to the various Tory infighting, and now the biggest gaffe of the campaign, that decision to come home early for D-Day for an ITV interview, has completely blown up in his face and has really dominated the news agenda for like 4 or 5 days now, which is pretty extraordinary in a 4 or 5 week campaign. He's getting out and about today to try and talk about some core Tory policies, and then he's got a big interview on the BBC this evening with Nick Robinson. Just talk us through what he's going to be announcing today, Sam, and what we can expect from the PM.
So finally, we see him. This matters because he cancelled the pool interview with broadcasters on Saturday and we didn't see him on Sunday. And that was something that unnerved Conservatives. But today we will. He's doing a pool interview this morning and then he will be interviewed by Nick Robinson for Panorama later. And I think they're recording that mid-afternoon. Interesting, Keir Starmer hasn't signed up for that one yet, according to the press release. Anyway, he has got to steady the ship. I mean, to be honest, Jack, are there any happy Tories at the moment? It's fair to say after that litany of disasters, the party isn't happy. I actually heard that Rishi Sunak wasn't in a great way on Saturday and that he cancelled those Saturday TV interviews for a reason. It's quite clear that the blame game for what happened on D-Day is underway. The official line is it fell between the cracks of the advice that civil servants provide versus what the Politicos were doing, kind of wrapped up in the kind of mania of the campaign. But you do get a lot of people just saying the problem is that Rishi just doesn't like these sorts of international occasions. So, well, good luck with the G7 in Italy later this week, Rishi. And there are reports that he considered, or that somebody considered, Grant Shapps subbing in for Rishi Sunak all day on Thursday, which is significant because that's something that Rishi Sunak specifically denied to me in that pool interview, but there's plenty of reports that like the French weren't expecting Rishi Sunak to come at one point. I do wonder whether that denial, which was comprehensive, that he and nobody around him ever considered not going, as what he said was the case, does hold water. And the consequence of this is I did a phone around of Tory MPs on Sunday night, and they are just abandoning any faith in the national campaign. The best that they can hope for tomorrow's manifesto launch is that it's not a disaster. They don't think there'll be a game changer. There isn't quite the level of panic that there might be amongst Tory MP or wannabe Tory MPs rather, partly because of what they're getting on the doorstep. But talking to them in detail, it's interesting who they're knocking on the doorstep. It's people who voted Conservative in the past and some undecided. So not exactly a full selection of the electorate, one that might give you a slightly rosier view. But there's no doubt the main job of Rishi Sunak, who's rolling out an announcement on getting more bobbies on the beat, 6,000 more police officers paid for by raising the visa fees and the health surcharge for migrants. He's desperate to kind of calm nerves a bit.
The thing that really worried Tory MP, or Tory candidate, I should say, that I was speaking to last night is if your political operation can make a mistake as glaringly obvious and bad as that one on D-Day last week, what's going to happen over the next few weeks? As I said before, the Tory campaign needed to be pitch perfect to have any chance of landing a decent result this time. Instead, it's been gaffe after gaffe, and you just wonder what's going to happen next, because it's going to be the same people making the decisions over the next few weeks as made that one, and it seems so obviously the wrong thing to do that I think people could barely believe it on Thursday that that's what Rishi Sunak was doing. The story sort of took a while to get going because I think there was an assumption that, well, there must be something very important the Prime Minister would be doing to come back from that. And indeed, it turned out it was just this interview. Should we just talk a little bit about the Tory disquiet as well over selection, Sam, because this issue about Rick Holden, the party chairman, being parachuted into Essex, having been a supposed Red Wall champion all these years, is still enraging Tories. And again, chatting to people over the weekend, this comes up again and again internally. I mean, I'm sure it's not cut through with average punters in the street, but the problem with it is that it upsets your foot soldiers and it upsets key people in the party who you really need to all be driving this campaign back on track right now. And instead, they're all grumbling and complaining to each other in WhatsApp groups about their party chairman, who is, of course, supposed to be one of the guys spearheading this whole campaign. So that's another bleak sign of where the Tory campaign is at, with just a few weeks to go until polling day.
We had a really disastrous interview by Rick Holden with my colleague John Craig. It was a pool interview, but John did it, where he doggedly tried to sidestep questions about the selection and talk about Emily Thornberry and the impact of the private school VAT policy on state schools. But it was just painful, and in the end, they all stopped the interview and kind of walked off with Rick Holden claiming that he'd answered everything to Channel 4. But by the way, he answered everything to Channel 4, and I think in a rather reluctant doorstep rather than a fulsome interview. But the kind of reaction I was getting from a Conservative candidate who was an MP and wants to be an MP again, Rick Holden is a disgrace to the Conservative Party. He's shown complete disdain for party members. It's a running joke that they hope it's a Labour gain in Basildon and Billericay, the seat that he's going for. Interestingly, those at the centre of the Conservative Party say, well, at least Rick Holden got the lines out and reporters are just talking about bubble matters, things of interest to people who work in Westminster rather than the country. I'll let everybody else decide whether that's more comical alley or not.
It's not just the selections or the gaffes, of course, that are terrifying Tory MPs. It's also Nigel Farage, another thing that has gone completely disastrously wrong for the Tories in this campaign. He is very much front and centre now for Reform UK, and he'll be doing a press conference today talking about tax. More interesting, I think, than Nigel Farage talking about tax, though, is Suella Braverman on the front page of the Times today, the former Home Secretary, saying the Tories should welcome Nigel Farage into the Conservative Party. Her decision to go over the top and say that at this point in the campaign, deeply unhelpful for Rishi Sunak, of course. It's all about positioning where the party might be after an election defeat. Equally unhelpful for Rishi Sunak, the Times decision to put it on the front page, again, gives you an indication, the Tories would be dreaming of some big front page Times headline about Bobby's on the beat today, and instead they get this. It just shows you how badly this campaign has gone for them so far.
Robert Jenrick also says, admit Nigel Farage post-election. Priti Patel says, under no circumstance you wouldn't want him in the party. Kemi Badenoch also indicating, don't let him in. I wouldn't support that. So it's going to be a big post if we get there. the Tories are defeated, the leadership contest, it's going to be a big divider there. Look, it's the Lib Dems' big day. We've got to give them their moment in the sun, although I have to say it's looking pretty rainy out of the window here in southeast London. I do think, Jack, they've been quite smart with the way that they've kind of got what bits of attention they get on this election campaign, because we all saw the stunts, but and Ed Davey clearly having the campaign of his lifetime, but they weave that in with his own personal story about caring for his son and caring for his mother who died of cancer when he was a teenager. And they have kind of bounced the policies off that personal story of the leader. Last week they rolled out these Scottish-style free social care promises, and this morning they're going to be talking more about that, but also their promise to what they say is rescue the NHS and care, which is a big package of spending paid for by capital gains tax, and raising the levies on banks in order to sort out the health service. A couple of key pledges that we'll hear about today: giving everyone the right to see a GP within 7 days or 24 hours if it's urgent, with more than 8,000 GPs to delivering it; guaranteeing access to an NHS dentist; mental health hubs for young people; and a guarantee of 100% of patients to start treatment for cancer within 62 days from an urgent referral. Again, linking back to that story, that personal story about Ed Davey. And also it seems like if you vote Lib Dem, you live longer. They're promising to help people spend 5 more years of their life in good health by investing in good public health. That one definitely made me smile.
Stick that on your pledge card. Yeah, I mean, I remember talking to Lib Dems last year about what their realistic expectations were for this election, and if you caught them in a private moment and an honest moment, they would be saying, well, maybe we can increase our number from a dozen or so seats up to maybe 20, 25. These big MRP polls we're seeing now, Sam, with the Tories at their absolute nadir, or at least they hope it's their nadir, talking about 60, 70 seats for the Lib Dems. I mean, were that to be borne out, that would be an incredible return to the sorts of heights that they saw really in their peaks in the noughties and early 2010s. No one would have seen that coming at this point in the campaign. No idea if that's where we'll end up, but it certainly means that we collectively in the media ought to be taking them a lot more seriously than perhaps just laughing at their stunts, as we've been doing for the last year or two. And so, yeah, I think their manifesto launch today is a bigger moment perhaps than any of us would have expected it to be.
That's right. And I think I am interested in what the role of the Liberal Democrats would be if there's a Labour landslide, however, because it doesn't mean that your policies are going to get enacted. Anyway, that's a question for later. I'm sure there'll be a chart-topping stunt. I'll be alongside Ed Davey today. So whatever it is in the rain, I'll be able to tell you about it in the morning.
Labour have got a big policy announcement today too, ahead of their manifesto, which is being launched on Thursday. They're making a big deal of this, Sam. There's been a lot of chatter about what Labour's big offer on childcare might end up looking like. Well, today we see at least part of it, which is a pledge to convert more than 3,000 unused classrooms into nurseries, adding 100,000 nursery places across the country. There is obviously a big shortage of childcare places in this country. The government has announced lots of free childcare, but there aren't really enough people to do it, and Labour here reckons they've got at least part of a plan to try and deliver some of that policy, again funding it through VAT on private school fees, a pot which seems to fund an awful lot of Labour policies, although they insist there will be enough money to do it. And yeah, I think this will be one part of a broader childcare drive from Labour, some of which we'll see this week, some of which may happen after an election, assuming they win. Tories, of course, will be raising questions about how much it'll cost, where's the money coming from, haven't you spent this money before, and so on, as they always do when Labour announces big spending pledges. I'm
quite interested just how kind of limited in scale this is in some ways. The plan only means a 6% increase overall in current childcare places, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies. And this sort of switch to school-based nurseries from private care, well, it means that 27% of childcare places will be located in schools, up from 22% last year. So it's a big deal, but is it transformative? Not in its first stage. And that speaks to a bigger theme I think we're going to see, which is Keir Starmer in the Guardian interview this morning accepted that the manifesto was the baseline from which he would operate, but clearly isn't going to have everything in it that the government, Labour government, would do. And so you're going to get this sort of two steps. So I think on the social care plans in the manifesto, you might get a hint that the Labour Party would introduce a social care cost cap, but whether or not it spells it out in detail or whether or not they flesh out that detail the other side of an election, I think is interesting. We're very much in the territory of signposts, not finished products in this manifesto, and I think that is just going to be a feature of what we're talking about on Thursday when they launch theirs.
Yeah, my colleague Dan Bloom wisely points out in Playbook that there is in fact still an ongoing childcare review being done by the Labour Party by a former Ofsted inspector that hasn't reported back yet, and you could see a big policy announcement coming much further down the tracks. Labour not really in the mood to be announcing radical, expensive policies at this point, given how far they are in the polls. But maybe we'll see more from them once they're in power, or maybe we won't. Who knows? Should we talk about Europe, Sam?
It's a disappointing night for incumbents all over. It's pretty sensational stuff. But before we talk about the change, it's probably worth saying what stayed the same. Actually, the sort of centre ground of European politics didn't change hugely. The four main pro-EU parties got about 60% of the vote and 456 out of the 720 seats. So before we go down a rabbit hole of everything going to the extremes, it's worth pointing out that the centre ground still has a majority. But my goodness, the big story of the night was the rise of the right. 23% of the seats in the European Parliament, 145 of them, have gone to far-right parties. And with the biggie being the Marine Le Pen's party in France getting 32% of the vote. That is double what Emmanuel Macron, the president's party, got. And so what does he do? He looks at what Rishi Sunak's done and thinks that's a great idea and goes to the country and calls an election. Helpfully, it's not an election that he has to take part in. He's the president, and he's sending the parties in Parliament out to face voters. It's an election that straddles, because it's 2 rounds, straddles our July the 4th. So round 1, June 30th, round 2, July 7th. But that's going to add a new dimension. Elsewhere, the Belgian Prime Minister's resigned, Alexander De Croo, after his party got 7% in the elections. In Germany, the far-right AfD came second and top in what was East Germany, with the German Chancellor's party, Olaf Scholz, in third place. It does look as if Ursula von der Leyen will get back in as European Commission President, although that's not absolutely certain. It's a bumpy time. We'll find out that at the end of the month on the 27th, 28th of June. But a big moment for Europe this morning.
If you've been watching French politics, it won't come as a surprise to see the far right doing so well over there, although the scale of the victory, I think, may have surprised some people, and certainly Macron's decision to respond by calling a snap election took everybody by surprise. It is a massive gamble, Sam. What Macron believes is that suddenly Le Pen and the far right have massive momentum from these European election results, and that he can stop that in its tracks with a domestic election where French people will vote down what he would imagine as more normal lines and back his party and stop that momentum in its tracks. But it's an enormous gamble. If he's wrong and Le Pen wins again, then suddenly he will be faced with the French Prime Minister from the far right, and he's going to look like he's going to be in an impossible position for the final years of his presidency, and then all the expectation will be, Sam, on a far-right presidential win in 2027. So the stakes are really, really high now in these French parliamentary elections. It's frankly a much more important election than our own, dare I say, with these two sort of vaguely centrist leaders struggling for power. But we're probably not allowed to say that on this podcast.
I'm not going to take that. Anyway, I've got to run to go and follow Ed Davey, so we better go. We will report back on that and everything else tomorrow.
Yeah, enjoy the Lib Dems, and we'll see you all in the morning. Thank you.
Brilliant. Cheers.